have over 25 pieces of gear to cover today, so if I want to keep this anywhere under 20 minutes, let's just jump right in.
Start it up.
Hey guys, Matthew here from My First Fish Tank, collaborating with Marine Depot. This week, episode 6 of the Beginner How-To Guide to Saltwater Aquariums and Reef Tanks. We talk all about the optional gear. So why is my hair all matted and I'm wearing different clothing? Because I'm using this new camera, and when I click the record button, I actually was stopping the record button, so all the stuff I recorded, I actually didn't record, so I have to film a few of these again. Last video, somebody left a comment and told me, Matthew, you forgot one piece of essential equipment, and they're right. I forgot heater. I actually filmed it and I put it in the video, but I must have deleted it by accident. So yes, a heater is an essential piece of saltwater aquarium equipment. Can I give you guys one general disclaimer for the whole video? Because last video, I just kept saying this over and over again. This video has over 25 pieces of equipment, and the purpose of this video is not to explain in detail each one of those pieces of equipment. We will deal with all this equipment at later videos. This is just a general overview as to what situations you may or may not need this piece of equipment. Okay, enough of the intro. Let's get started. First up, oh my god, my kitty. My kitty is photobombing me all day. Oh my goodness, you need to stay off today. He hates being held. Okay. First up, we have protein skimmers. Is this necessary? No, it's not necessary. Just look behind me. Protein skimmer, mixed reef tank, no protein skimmer. A protein skimmer may become necessary over time, because what a protein skimmer does is it removes very, very small organics which help prevent them break down into nitrates, right? So if you're having really high nutrient levels, especially your nitrates, then a protein skimmer may be one of the ways to help lower that and stabilize your water parameters. Number 2, reactors. This is a kalkwasser reactor, which is not a common reactor, but there are all sorts of reactors. There are your general media reactors for GFO, for carbon, for biopellets. You have calcium reactors, you have algae scrubbers, or chaetomorpha reactors. All a reactor is it's a chamber for some sort of media to react. You don't need a reactor, but I use a reactor on 2 of my tanks, and specifically the reason I use a reactor is when my phosphates get out of hand and I can't seem to lower it down. Using a reactor with the appropriate media is one of the ways to lower those nutrient levels. I'm also going to be adding a reactor on this tank right here because my protein skimmer isn't working enough to really get those nitrate levels down. So I'm going to be adding a biopellet reactor to help lower those things. You absolutely don't need it. This tank doesn't have them, and instead of using a reactor with a pump, you can just use a media bag, but reactors are definitely more efficient in using the media. Number 3 is media. GFO, carbon, kalkwasser, biopellets. Do you need media? No, you don't need media, and a lot of beginners make a mistake of just adding media when you don't need it. Sometimes media can be really helpful. If you have high phosphates, then using some sort of GFO can be great. If you have smells or discolorations or some sort of chemical warfare, then maybe carbon is the right option. If you want an easy way to dose your tank instead of 2-part and you have, not too much calcium or alkalinity depletion every day, then kalkwasser could be something good. But as a beginner, don't go hunting for solutions to problems that don't exist. Wait until you have problems and have tried other things before you start using media. The 4th item is an RODI filter. Again, it's not essential, but if you don't have an RODI filter, then you have 2 options. 1 is to go to the store and buy distilled water, or 2, go to the local fish store and buy RODI water. RODI filters are one of those things that seem expensive up front, around $200, but it's one item that I recommend over and over again for beginners because it will make your joy of this hobby so much better and your hassle so much less, and over time it will easily pay for itself. The 5th item, filter socks. Obviously, you don't need filter socks, but this is a really good method of mechanical filtration. I've gone through phases in the hobby where I've used them, where I haven't used them. I currently do use them on 2 of my tanks because I find they just capture so much gunk, and when I'm dealing with phosphate and nitrate issues in heavily stocked tanks, they can be really helpful. But I know plenty of people who rely on other things. They rely on sponges, they rely on filter cups, they rely on filter floss. You don't need this to be successful, and in fact, this tank doesn't even use a filter sock, but they can be helpful, especially if you need to lower down your nitrate and your phosphate levels by changing these out every day. Item number 6 is just a simple sponge. Do you need a sponge? No, they're just like filter socks. It's just another way to have mechanical filtration. I use a sponge as my primary mechanical filter over here. I find sponges to be helpful in lower nutrient systems. If you have a lot of nutrients, a sponge just might not cut it. But yeah, a sponge is a good weapon to have in your arsenal for mechanical filtration. Number 7 is a refugium. A refugium can be confusing for people, but basically it's a refuge. And in a refugium, people usually use it to grow macroalgae and to provide a safe place for their pods, their amphipods and their copepods. You don't need a refugium, but a refugium can be really helpful for two things. One, nutrient export. If you are dealing with high nitrates and phosphates, putting in macroalgae into a refugium can help because that macroalgae will consume nitrates and phosphate. And two, it's a great place to grow and to help breed copepods and amphipods. So if you have some sort of livestock like a mandarin dragonet, it's a really good idea to have a refugium so you can keep up a high supply of copepods. Number 8 is an algae scrubber or algae reactor. It has the exact same function as a refugium that grows macroalgae. An algae reactor, basically you just take a reactor and you put algae in there and it consumes the nitrates and the phosphates. An algae scrubber works very similarly, but it's an external box that drips water over this kind of perforated sheet, and then you just have to manually remove it. You don't need these things, but if you're struggling with high phosphates and high nitrates, you could go with a refugium, an algae scrubber, or an algae reactor. First up, we have a foam mat. No foam mat, foam mat, foam mat, foam mat. You don't need a foam mat. All a foam mat does is it help even out the inconsistencies on the top of the stand. Because just imagine if the top of your stand had some sort of bumps on it and that bump pressed against the glass, it's going to stress out that one area and possibly lead to cracks. So if you have a small tank, 10, 20 gallons or less, that's probably not something you need, but why not go to Amazon, buy an inexpensive yoga mat, and just cut out a foam mat to place on top of your stand. Number 2 is a stand. We already talked all about stands. Do you need a stand? No, you never need a stand. You can always just put it on the ground. But a stand does raise it up, makes it easier to service, has a nice viewing angle, and can also hide your sump and all sorts of other equipment. So I personally do love having stands, but if I have a really small tank, I'll just put it on a sturdy desktop. Number 3 is a sump. Now, of course, you don't need a sump, but if you have a larger tank and really want to experiment with the full range of filtration options, then a sump is a great idea. A sump is fantastic because it hides all of your filtration gear, and it also increases the overall water volume of your tank, which leads to more stability. I don't have a sump in this one. I do have a sump in these two. So I have 2 sumps and 3 tanks with no sumps. You absolutely don't need a sump, but a sump is just a much bigger area that you can put in a big protein skimmer, 1 or 2 reactors. Oftentimes you can put a macroalgae refugium. It can be a place to house your auto top-off reservoir. But for beginners, I don't typically recommend larger tanks with sumps just because it can overcomplicate things. A simple rear filtration chamber will do the trick just fine. Number 4 is a fan. Not necessary depending on where you live, but in the summertime here in the Palm Springs area, we keep our house at 78, which means all of my tanks would go to around 80 to 82 degrees. So I just put a small fan, attach it to my Bayite controller, and I have it turn on, and that does seem to help keep the temperature down by 2 degrees through evaporative cooling, which is just enough for us in the summer. Number 5 is a chiller. This is just a simple thermoelectric chiller meant for small tanks. You might need a chiller, 1, if you have a cold water marine tank, 2, if you live in an area with really high temperatures and you keep your house really warm, especially in the summertime, Or 3, if you're having some sort of livestock like certain seahorses or pipefish that like to keep the temperature somewhere closer to 72 degrees, you may need something like this. This thermoelectric chiller is fantastic for small tanks, but if you have a larger tank, you may have to bite the bullet, pay several $100s to get a larger chiller. Number 6 is salt mix. I've gotten made fun of this in previous videos before for calling salt mix optional. I'm not saying salt water is optional in a saltwater aquarium. Obviously, you need salt water to have a saltwater aquarium. I'm saying you can get away without buying salt mix yourself, because if you live near an ocean or you live near a local fish store, they make salt water and you can just go there and buy it. I've always mixed my own salt water just because I bought an RODI filter early on, and I really do recommend doing it yourself because you will save a lot of money in the long run. Number 7 is sand. You don't need a sand bed, but a sand bed does provide several things. A sand bed can provide a home for various animals. There are certain kinds of snails, starfish, gobies that rely on a sand bed to sleep at night, to eat, and to feel safe. But a sand bed also is a highly porous area that houses a ton of beneficial bacteria. But you don't need that. One of my tanks over here is a bare bottom tank. And yes, it has a nice aesthetic to it, and it's just easier to clean and keep detritus from. But no, you don't need a sand bed. You can definitely go with a bare bottom tank. Just be aware that you may need to add in some more live rock or some more ceramic media to really beef up your biological filtration if you go without a sand bed. Number 8, calcium and alkalinity test kits. If you're gonna have any sort of corals, then yeah, you're gonna need at a bare minimum to test for calcium and alkalinity. If you're just going with a fish only system, or you're just gonna put in a few corals and keep up on your weekly water changes, you can probably get away without this, but I mean, why not? You know, it's really good to track, and then as you get into the hobby, you'll probably start buying more and more corals and have more and more inverts, so it'll be a good idea to track your calcium and alkalinity because you may have to start dosing. And number 8 is a controller. There are different types of controllers from something like this, which is a simple temperature controller. This one's made by Inkbird. It's not my favorite. My favorite is actually a Bayite temperature controller, but this one works just fine. And what you can do is you can plug in a heater and a fan to these things, and you can have it turn on a fan if it gets too hot and turn on the heater when it gets too cold. Great investments. I recommend every single person use one of these, but there are also really, really fancy controllers like a Neptune Apex that can cost you thousands of dollars. And while there are a lot of great benefits to a fancy controller like that, I don't even own one of those because it just doesn't make sense in my setup. And for most hobbyists, you don't need something. If you're a super techie person and you just want to spend $1,000 on a fancy controller, then by all means go for it. But the only controller I recommend, especially to beginners, is just a simple temperature controller. First up, we have fishless cycling. There are just so many different fishless cycling products out there. The basics of all fishless cycling products are some sort of ammonia chloride and then some sort of beneficial bacteria, all of which these are beneficial bacteria. I definitely do recommend a fishless cycle because one, it's way nicer to your fish, because if you put a fish in a tank and then cycle it, you're exposing them to ammonia levels, which are toxic to them, so it stresses them out. It is also faster to do a fishless cycle oftentimes because you can just dose things and your tank can be cycled within a couple weeks. So no, you don't need to do a fishless cycle with some sort of fancy products, but it's definitely recommended. Number 2 is an auto top-off pump. Do you need an auto top-off system? Of course you don't need an auto top-off system. You can do what I do on one of my tanks, which is just get a pitcher, fill it with RODI water, and then every single day go around to those tanks that don't have an auto top-off system and just pour a little bit in. But on my bigger tanks, out would be a lot every single day. So you can go ahead and pick up something like this from Reef Breeders. There's all sorts of different companies that make these auto top-off systems, and they're awesome. They will automate the process for you. You add a pump, and they will just either optically or physically read the water height and then add the water for you. So if you just fill up like a 5-gallon bucket with RODI water, then you really only have to fill up that bucket once a week, which is just so much easier in the long run than having to take this around to all your tanks. Number 3, two-part dosing. Two-part dosing is kind of a misnomer. It's calcium, alkalinity, but also magnesium. There are different ways of going about it. Two-part dosing is not necessarily essential. There are a couple ways to get around two-part dosing. If you don't have any corals, then you probably never ever need to two-part dose unless you have like a crazy amount of inverts in there. But if you do have some corals, you might not need to two-part dose if you buy a salt mix that's high in calcium and alkalinity and you keep up on your water changes. Something like the Red Sea Coral Pro Salt would fit that bill just fine. But you may need to two-part dose if for some reason your tank is depleting calcium and alkalinity at a faster rate than you're adding it back in. You can either two-part dose by hand or you can set it up with dosing pumps. That leads us to number 4, dosing pumps. There are just different kinds of dosing pumps, from something that's just manual that you have to program by hand to something a little bit fancier like this Comore Wi-Fi pump that you can control from anywhere. You don't need a dosing pump. For example, I don't have a dosing pump in this tank. I just manually dose as necessary. But for my tanks that are packed with corals, like this one and this one, I found that I have to put in between 5 and 10 milliliters of calcium and alkalinity every day, even with my weekly water changes. So investing in a dosing pump to automate that for you in the long run will just save you a lot of time. Number 5 is a wave maker. A wave maker is really any sort of power head that has some sort of pulsing motion. That's really all it is. There's really inexpensive wave makers and really expensive wave makers. In a really small tank, let's say something like 15 gallons or under, you might not need a wave maker. You might have enough flow in there with just your return pump. But a wave maker comes in really handy, 1, for larger tanks, and 2, for systems that want to create more flow. Some of your corals will need medium to high flow, so investing in a wave maker will be a good idea at that point. Number 6 is a calcium reactor. Here's a little secret. I've actually never used a calcium reactor in my life. A calcium reactor is basically a way of adding calcium and alkalinity back into your tank automatically. Basically, you take a reactor, you stuff it with aragonite, which is calcium carbonate, you add a little carbon dioxide, which melts the aragonite and produces calcium and carbonate, which will then feed your corals. Absolutely not essential. The only time you would want to consider is if you have a large tank with a lot of small polyp stony corals and it's just depleting your calcium and your alkalinity super fast. Then an affordable option, and an option that will just save you a lot of headache, is to purchase a calcium reactor. And our 7th and final item is battery-powered air stones. I think owning these, which are incredibly inexpensive, is just a good idea. And you should own one of these for every single one of your tanks. These here, I think I got them for $10 on Amazon. They run with 2 C or D batteries. And in the event of an extended power outage, the primary reason your fish and your corals will die is oxygen depletion. Because how does oxygen get into your tank? Through water surface agitation. And if you don't have any agitation, they will use up all of that oxygen quickly. So do yourself a favor, purchase a few of these at the start, at least one for each of your tanks, and that way in an extended power outage, you have a greater chance of success with keeping your livestock alive. That's it for episode number 6. Be sure to tune in next week for episode 7, where we're going to discuss the key things you need to know before buying your gear. If you found this video helpful, please consider sharing it with a friend, giving it a thumbs up, and subscribing to both Marine Depot and to My First Fish Tank. And as always, thanks for watching, everybody. Happy reefing. We'll see you next week. Be well.